that is fairly easily bridged in the 18th century. What happens is that Peter Ory gets to the Georgetown side of the river before the British get there. Next one. So this is kind of my guess of how that came down. These roads, these are the 18th century roads that are still appear to me to be exactly in the same place. This is 521 coming out of Georgetown, and there's the great bend in it right there. The headwaters of the Symp River right there. It's not hardly a big river at all, it's just a big creek. So you got Marion following Watson, who coming along this road to the northeast. Watson gets to this point. Riflemen have been deployed here. Ory's dragoons are backing up the riflemen. And the idea was for these riflemen to fire into the British and stop them there. Here you have Marion's main army come from behind. They were close enough for Watson surely to have known that they were back behind them. And so Watson immediately knows, you know, I've got Marion's army behind me here. I'm pushed up against this creek. This is a bad place for me to stop and have a fight, because remember, the whole idea was for Watson to pick his ground and let Marion come to him. So Watson divides his force into three and basically does the quarterback up the middle play with some flankers. The lieutenant who was in command of these sharpshooters, as soon as the British hit the water and started coming through the water at them, decided that it was time to skedaddle out of there. And so this defensive play that should have stopped the British there, they probably really didn't pause any longer than enough to pull their bayonet out and maybe do that with it and fix it on the end and say, let's go across the water. Now, remember, with Watson is 150 of Richburg's militia, some of whom had no doubt been up this road many times going to Georgetown, and they knew whether this was fordable or not, they knew whether the tide was up or down or not, and they probably had already talked to Watson, because this was going to be another causeway and crossing point, and knew that they could just plunge in that water and get right over to the other side. And that's exactly what Watson did. And he was able to clear Marion's men and push on in toward Georgetown, which was never really his ultimate goal, because the British already held Georgetown. At this time, though, it was probably time to resupply, because with Marion having so much domination of the countryside, it wasn't like Watson was able to send out details to forage, so they had to be pretty much carrying the food that they needed for themselves and their horses. So the punchline to this interesting topic that I kind of retitled, but Dave Nealon had said, we're going to analyze the correspondence and tell you everything there is to know about the Bridges campaign. Guess what? Neither Marion nor Watson ever that we have discovered writes a word about the military campaign. Now, they all wrote over a dozen letters back and forth saying each other were guilty of piling on, ungentlemanly, unsportsmanlike conduct and all this kind of stuff. But none of them said anything about their strategy, their tactics, anything like that was ever written. And so this is really one of the frustrations in dealing with the Marion papers, is that if you don't have the background as to what's going on, none of the letters make very much sense. And it's very typical of Marion, if you will, to be engaged in a fight, write a letter, say nothing about the fight that we know happened, and talk about something else that's pragmatic that he has on his mind. And so the Bridges campaign is the poster child for this kind of thing happening. After the war, Watson wrote an extensive memoir of his brilliant maneuvers in the South, and patted himself on the back really greatly. But he didn't mention it either. And so, unfortunately, in Rawdon's communication and Balfour's communication, while they talk about the campaign, they don't mention the change in tactics. You have to go back and start in about, right after the Battle of Camden, and watch how Rawdon and Cornwallis and then Rawdon and Balfour are coordinating the anti-partisan part of the Southern campaign in South Carolina. And then you see that when Watson finally takes over, all of those other units go back into garrison, and Watson goes to Blakeney's and just sits there. And had Marion said, "I'm going to attack you there," I think that the story would have been entirely different, because I don't have any doubt that Watson, with 500 crack troops, could not have handled what Marion had with him. But of course, Marion had more sense than to do that. So, next slide. After the sandpit, of course, what was other thing that was really going on is this. No question that Watson was to entertain Marion, while Doyle, Lieutenant Wellmore Ellis Doyle, was detached to go hit the secret base at Snow's Island, which he did. Doyle, with about 400 men, beat it down the Lynch's River in double time. There was a part of one of Marion's regiments there under Hugh Irvin guarding Snow's Island. They were overpowered in a hurry. And so Marion's supply base, prison camp, what have you, camp on repose at Snow's Island was overwhelmed by Doyle. And all that was done while Marion was writing letters back and forth concerning the proper general